you love me telling my stories, or you can snuggle. Oh, yes. Hey guys, and welcome to Passion Fruit, where we pursue lives with purpose together, dogs included. So today is a really miserable rainy day here in Sydney, where I'm from, and it just feels like the perfect weather to snuggle and chat and get a tea. So if you're a tea or coffee or matcha or hot chocolate person, feel free to make yourself a nice beverage and settle in. So some context before I dive into my story. Here at Passion Fruit, there's 5 of us on the channel. Hopefully you've got to know us all a little bit by now, but if not, welcome to the channel. This is a shared channel between 5 creators, and something that we all have in common, and actually it's one of the things that united us in the first place, is that we all come from Christian backgrounds or upbringings. And it's funny because although belief in Jesus brought us together in the first place, I think the ability to freely question those beliefs is what has kept us together as friends and as a channel. And something we want to do more going forward is kind of share our individual journeys and share some of the deconstruction that we've been on in order to make God more accessible, I suppose. Like, even the term Christianity comes with a lot of baggage, and that's a real shame because there are beautiful, purpose-filled, peace-filled beliefs that come with the Christian faith, but there's also downsides and a lot of baggage that comes with that term, which turns away people from the get-go. So all that being said, I'm going to share my journey today, and I've actually never publicly shared this before, partially because I don't know, I feel like one of those Christians, those goody two-shoes who sits in church and is like, I've never done anything crazy, like I don't have a testimony to share. And this isn't so much my testimony, but it is my deconstruction journey. Maybe worded a little bit differently, it's the story of how I've reconciled my faith, my understanding of who God is, against Christians and a church culture that is often very, judgmental, difficult, corrupt, full of hypocrisy, and not reflecting the love of Jesus. So with all that being said, let's dive in. As a kid, I had parents who were very encouraging and very supportive of my faith journey. We went to church every single week. My parents ran our Sabbath school classes. They were very involved in our spiritual development, and I'm really grateful for that. I don't know if I would be where I am today without their influence. But I should specify that the denomination that I was specifically raised in is the Seventh-day Adventist church. Now, this is a denomination that a lot of people don't know about or have preconceived notions about, so I'll just specify what that actually means. Basically, it's a Protestant denomination. No, it's not like Jehovah's Witnesses, and no, it's not like the Mormons. It's probably closer to like a Baptist church in terms of belief and practice, but we have a few differences in the sense that we worship on Saturday, the Sabbath. Just a few differences, but generally speaking, it is a Protestant denomination. But I would say the first kind of pivotal moment in my faith journey, when faith kind of became my own, so to speak, was when I was 12 years old, and we were sitting in our Sabbath school class one day, and this was maybe a class of about 12 kids where we do crafts and, you know, read the Bible and things like that. And anyway, my teacher played a sermon like on the DVD player, or maybe even video player at the time, I don't know. But it was a sermon called Indescribable by Louis Giglio. Now I do recommend kids and adults of all ages to watch this sermon because it kind of changed my whole perspective on existence, at least as a 12-year-old. But to cut a long story short, Louis Giglio basically did a visual zoom out from planet Earth. He took the Earth and then he went to like Jupiter, and Jupiter's like 100 times the size of Earth. And then he went to the galaxy, this like, you know, the Milky Way galaxy, which is, and then now the Earth is a speck. And then he went to this galaxy and this. And by the time he got to like the known universe, essentially, it's as though the Earth didn't exist at all. And I just remember this was like the first fundamental perspective shift that I'd had, like this first turn toward existential reality, where I was like, oh my goodness. After the sermon, my Sabbath school teacher added this statement that has always stuck with me when she said, think about how tiny you are, how insignificant you are, and yet, even if you had been the only single human on planet Earth, Jesus still would have left his heavenly kingdom and died for you. That's how much he loves you. And it was so humbling and so like just wow, thinking that God still loved me and still took the time to create me, even though he is bigger than the known universe. That changed my life, and still thinking about it today, it still makes me emotional thinking about that. And that's the first time I kind of took my faith seriously and realized, wow, like if God actually does love me that much, and if that is true, then this is a God worth following. I guess from that point onwards, until I was 17, which is the age I got baptized, I took my faith, I guess, fairly seriously, at least for a kid. Like I would study the Bible and read, devotional books. I'd go to church regularly. And I'd say I was like a fairly biblically literate kid. And as I said, at age 17, I made the decision to be baptized. Looking back on that, I don't know. Ironically, I don't know if I was really ready, if I'd fully processed faith, because I'd never gone through a deconstruction. I was kind of just like professing blind faith that I had in the religion I was brought up in, which is beautiful in a way, right? It's like it's very honest, very innocent expression of faith. Put it this way, at 17, I was a lot more sure about what I believed than I am now. Not because I doubt God or his character, but because I just think my worldview and my ability to hold conflicting ideas in tension is obviously a lot bigger now. So yeah, age 17, I'm baptized. Age 18, I graduate high school. And this is the point where my world really opens up. So I'd gone from like attending an Adventist church and an Adventist primary school and an Adventist high school and being in a really bubbly church bubble to being exposed to all kinds of people, religions, careers, paths, beliefs. Now, if you've seen my other videos, you'll know that I studied law at university, which is, look, it's actually maybe not as secular as you might expect. There is a lot of Christian principles underpinning laws in the Western world, which, especially in a country, like a very secular country like Australia, was surprising to me. Nevertheless, I was exposed to a much bigger world out there. And I do remember vividly, there was one assignment that we had to work on, and I was put in a group with 6 other girls. I don't know how we got onto this topic, because it wasn't really, maybe it was relevant, but I don't think it was relevant to the question we were answering. It was all about faith and what we believed. And I think 4 out of 6 of the girls were Catholic, 1 was atheist, and 1 was a different, maybe Muslim, I don't remember exactly. But I remember we somehow got onto the topic of purgatory. And this was the first time I'd ever really heard of purgatory. And as people were explaining this, it really challenged me, because on one hand, it made me realize that a lot of people have a very different understanding of the same God that I believe in. And this is the thing when it comes to deconstruction. Let me just put a little caveat here. When we talk about deconstructing religion and our belief in God, when I use the word God, that is a loaded term. If I say I worship the Christian God and you say, oh yeah, I also worship the Christian God, that can mean 2 vastly different things. Because for me, that God is gracious and he is loving and he is kind and he is just like the best, right? But to someone else, that same God could be judgmental, he could be a murderer, he could be confusing, he could be inaccessible. If you are deconstructing at the moment, I think it's really important to know which God you are deconstructing, or what those main characteristics of God are that you've come to associate with him. Anyway, caveat over. So I'm sitting there in this group talking about purgatory, realizing that these girls have a very different understanding of God to me. But at the same time, it was really affirming, because as I'm asking questions, I was realizing that these girls didn't necessarily know what they believed. And on the flip side, at least at the time, I have a lot more perspective now, but at the time, I was like, wow, I really know what I believe in comparison, right? I knew where the Bible verses were. I knew the doctrines and the things that I believed more so than perhaps the average kind of Christian. And that was a really interesting tension to kind of walk in, because on one hand, I'm like, yeah, I know what I believe. But on the other hand, I was like, but I only know what I believe in this very narrow bubble and understanding of who God is. Is God bigger than that? So it's interesting, because that happened nearly 10 years ago now, being exposed to just a lot of beliefs and also a lot of like worldly behaviors. That is a loaded term, but at the time, that's how I would have defined it. Partying and drinking and sleeping around and all that kind of stuff, which I had never been exposed to. Like I was at a crisis point. I was like, this could go either way. Like, I'm a Christian in this brand new environment. Will I assimilate or will I stand out? kind of thing. And like, this wasn't a conscious decision. This was more of this is what I've gleaned in hindsight from this experience. It could have gone either way. Thankfully, in some ways, it went I'm going to stick to my beliefs route, and like, I still stayed in church and things. But at the same time, ironically, now 10 years on, even though I'm not in that environment anymore, I am largely back in kind of a Christian-esque bubble. I was more certain of what I believed at that point in my life than I am now. And that's not to say that I've thrown out God. I've never thrown out God. I've never like doubted God's existence. I've never been through a process where I'm like, is God real? I don't know. I mean, I've asked those questions, but I think for me, the evidence for God in something as simple as like a leaf on a tree and how beautiful and intricate that is. Like, I just look out into creation and I'm like, God has to be real. And that has always been very reassuring for me in my faith journey. And it's allowed me to hold on to the knowledge that God exists. However, my deconstruction was much more cultural, I will say. At this point, it's very important that I explain something about Adventism that is unique to Adventism compared to many other religions, denominations rather. So as I mentioned, we do have a couple of unique beliefs on, the state of the dead, what happens when you die, do you go straight to heaven or whatever, on hell, and on, the Sabbath and why we worship on Sabbath, etc. I won't go into the details of that, but I think I've come to a place where I recognize that those beliefs paint a really loving picture of God compared to some other denominations. For example, we don't believe in a literal forever hell. We believe that hell is like an event where God eradicates sin and then there is no burning forever and ever. And other denominations also believe that hell is kind of like a wide gambit of belief among denominations. There is lots of different variations of belief in that. But for me, I think if I did, or if I was raised to believe in a hell that is burning forever and ever and ever and ever, I would really struggle to reconcile an all-loving God with a forever cruel thing to do, you know what I mean? So we do have a few different doctrinal beliefs to other Christian denominations, but generally speaking, we believe in the same gospel and the same God, etc. The one thing that we do have that is unique, or at least has a special flavor in Adventism, is Christian behavior. Now that's kind of just an umbrella term, I guess, but long story short, in the Adventist church, we have a prophet, asterisk, caveat, I don't know where I stand on this. We have a prophet called Ellen White who prescribed a lot of different behavioral standards on a good Adventist or a good Christian. One of which is being a vegetarian, not drinking alcohol, not doing drugs. There's also rules about dancing, going to the movies, wearing modest clothing, not wearing jewelry, going to church every single week. And while a lot of these things are good, I'm not saying it's bad to be vegetarian or it's bad to not drink alcohol. I think those are good things. When they become spiritualized things, it gets very murky. Gets very difficult. Anyway, so just keep that in mind as I explain the next little section. So when I was 22, I graduated uni and got my first job not working in law. If you want to see that video and why I changed career paths completely, you can check out the other videos on our channel. But I started working at a media center, essentially working in magazine publishing, news, and like article writing and social media. My role was an assistant editor for a magazine run by our church. So this was a Seventh-day Adventist employer. I would do Adventist communications for all of the churches in the South Pacific. Now, I loved this job for many reasons, but it was also the place I began to deconstruct my faith. Because I was an assistant editor, we would often get feedback. We would get letters to the editor, we would get phone calls, we would get emails from people who, in my opinion, did not express the love of Christ. We'll just put it that way. I remember one example that I was deeply disturbed by. We got a call from someone in like the 70+ age bracket who tends to hold very fast to some of these behavioral principles and really spiritualize them. Not to say that all older demographic people are like this, but this was just a common trend that I saw. And they said to me, excuse me, what do you think you're doing with the front cover of your magazine? And I was like, okay, which magazine are you referring to? We've got a lot of, we do an issue every 2 weeks. And they said the most recent one. And I said, okay. And so I'm trying to find the most recent issue, the cover of it. And I was like, what's wrong with it? This was a picture of a guy wearing a suit, smiling, kind of like this. Basically just a classic stock image. And she was like, it is terrible that you would have this person featured on the front of our magazine. Look how awful his hair is. And I was like, what's wrong with his hair? Excuse me? And she was like, I don't think this is the kind of representation that our church should be featuring. And then the penny dropped, because she hadn't said it, but she had said it. The man on the front of the cover, this stock image, was of an African American with an afro, smiling, holding his Bible, thumbs up. Man alive. I still don't know how to reconcile a Christian who's that judgmental and that hateful toward other nationalities and say that they believe in a loving God. You know what I mean? Like, that was really challenging. And these kind of situations would come up again and again. I remember one other phone call that I got was for a news article that I'd written, and there was two pictures, and both of the pastors were standing next to their wives. One lady was an older lady, and she had on just like a regular t-shirt. She had a necklace on, and she had like a V-neck that showed a tiny bit of cleavage, but like nothing untoward, nothing problematic. So she was an older lady. And then the wife next to her in the next picture was a young woman, maybe 30-ish years old, and she had an off-the-shoulder top, no jewelry. Both of them looked lovely. We get a phone call from, again, another disgruntled saint. And they were complaining quite fervently about the fact that the younger woman had an off-the-shoulder top and how that was completely inappropriate to publish in a Christian magazine. Meanwhile, the other woman has part cleavage showing and has a necklace on, and they didn't take any issue with that. And so there were just all of these different hypocritical and like just all of these little things, all of these little complaints and behaviors and non-doctrinal issues that people would get hung up on and overly spiritualize that began to wear me down. And so I began to see a contradiction, a fundamental flaw within a lot of individual Adventists or Christians, where they profess to believe in a loving God who is merciful and gracious and like accepts everyone as they are, and yet at the same time is not merciful and loving and gracious, because clearly God can't love someone who has an off-the-shoulder top, and clearly God can't love someone who has an afro. You know what I mean? That was just very difficult to reconcile. So it wasn't only those like behavioral nitpicky things that I began to see. I also saw being more exposed to this like corporate institutional structure of the global Adventist church. I learned a lot about how it functions. But when I saw decisions that were being made by people at the top of this pipeline that were hurtful, judgmental, discriminatory, and restrictive of various demographics, specifically women, LGBTQ, and other minorities within the church, that really didn't sit right with me. And I struggled to know how to reconcile my personal faith within an institution that actively discriminated essentially against certain people groups. That is still very difficult to reconcile, and I don't think I've got to a place that I'm happy with. But yeah, my deconstruction, I suppose, has been less of a questioning God's existence and more of a questioning whether I can call myself an Adventist, even though I believe a lot of the doctrines. But then the God that comes through those beliefs is not always actively reflected in the people that I worship with and in the institution that I serve. And so I got to a point in my journey in working at this magazine where I would come home each day and cry because I didn't want to go to church anymore. I didn't want to participate in a church community anymore. I was burnt out by religion. I guess I was sick and tired of the cognitive dissonance I was experiencing between who I believed God was and the expression of faith that was opposite to God's character that I saw expressed so often. And so I quit that job 3 years ago now. And since then I've been a lot more free to explore my faith, because when you work for an institution, you're expected to uphold their beliefs and their practices, and that's fine. I completely understand that, and at the time I did. And look, I still do to a large extent, but I'm now a lot more free to question, and I'm now a lot more free to explore other people's doctrinal beliefs and read books and listen to sermons and just absorb a wider gambit of theology and philosophy. All that being said though, I am still actively attending an Adventist church. I am very involved there. I do music. I'm the youth and young adult leader. But I will say the saving grace of the church that I go to is that our young adults youth group operates almost like a mini church within a church, where I feel comfortable to have nuanced and difficult conversations with my friends who are part of that group that I wouldn't feel comfortable to have with the wider church. And I think at the end of the day, like when I introduce myself to someone who doesn't know that I'm a Christian or whatever, I feel uncomfortable calling myself an Adventist a lot of the time, depending on their exposure to Christianity and how much they understand about Adventism, but there is a lot of baggage that comes with that title. And so often I'll just say, I'm a Christian or I'm a disciple of Jesus, because I think that actually is slightly maybe more accurate, simply because there are a lot of questions that I haven't yet resolved in my faith and that I don't think are resolvable because they're not necessarily doctrinal issues. It's not like I can look up a Bible verse and be like, oh yes, this is the answer to women's ordination, or yes, this is the answer to LGBTQ issues, or etc. They're very cultural issues, and unfortunately culture changes and evolves over time, and the church in general, Christendom, the church culture is about 50 years behind the predominant modern culture of at least Western society. So that's challenging to reconcile, because as a young person especially, I'm going to be more progressive than people in that older age bracket. But what I have learned to do is put aside the frustrations, put aside the questions, and still come to God as I am and worship. The older I get and the more experience and exposure I have to the world, the less important all those little details are to me. I think the world is such a complicated place, and Adventism especially, but Christianity as well, often majors on the minors, which means that they make a massive deal out of little details that don't actually have any practical relevance or application to people's day-to-day lives and struggles. I think the things that people struggle with are things like relationship breakdowns and busyness, finding purpose and loneliness and connection and, cost of living, the environment, climate change, politics, bad health. There are these big things going on in people's lives. And I don't think that religion, or at least Christianity, and definitely Adventism, addresses these very well, because we major on the minors. The expression of denominational theology and belief and culture is largely irrelevant to the average human being. And so I think where I'm at now in my deconstruction process, especially as someone who is passionate about good communication, like I work in comms, I'm my biggest pet peeve is people who ramble or don't communicate well. Lol. This video, cut me some slack. This is like a big topic, but I just think that it's so much more important to focus on addressing human needs, doing what Jesus did. He ministered to the poor. He ministered to the hearts of people. He didn't complain about people's clothing or whether they were vegetarian or whether women were allowed to be disciples or not. He allowed everyone to be disciples. He loved everyone. And so my deconstruction process, I think, has been largely recognizing that I don't want to major in the minors anymore. Now, caveat to that, if I'm talking to a fellow Adventist who's also going through a deconstruction journey or struggling with these things or has insights to share, I'm obviously going to talk about the minors, the nitty-gritties, the theology. But in my day-to-day life, I don't know, when I was 17, learning the 28 fundamental beliefs of the Adventist Church, it's something that we have, basically a statement of all our theology. Understanding that and really challenging that was really important to me, because I was trying to express that as a good Adventist girl. But now, obviously there are some aspects of that that are very important, but a lot of it is not important, because why would I be worrying about that in my own life when there are people out there that have never met a God who is all loving, who can provide them with peace and purpose and meaning and eternal life. That seems like the priority to me. It's funny because although I've never been less sure about the specific theology that I believe, I am more sure than ever about the God that I worship, his character, and my salvation. I know that I'm saved. I know that God will take me home one day to be with him. And that's all that matters. The rest of it's kind of just change, We're all going through a different journey. And I think it's actually important. A lot of Christians are afraid of deconstruction because it's like, oh, you don't believe in God anymore, or you're going to lead other people astray or whatever. But that's just an expression of fear. And I think when you are full of the love of God, you're less fearful of these things. You're more open-minded to these things. So yes, while theology is important in that it shapes your understanding of who God is, his character, and if you get that character wrong, that's a big not red flag, but like it's a big issue, because it can lead you down a path of not wanting to believe in him anymore. That's where theology is important. But the rest of it, I don't know. I'm just at a point where I don't know, and that's okay. Anyway, I've rambled enough. I've spilled the tea. Thank you so much for watching. Regardless of what you believe and where you're coming from in this video, I hope that there's been something that's resonated with you. I hope that it's encouraged you in some way. And I do invite you to comment below if you have any thoughts on anything I've shared, on what I've shared, but also your own deconstruction journey. Let me know where you are at. It's a big process. And if you haven't got all the answers yet, that's okay. Neither have I. But I hope that this video has encouraged you in some way and hopefully helped you to also not major in the minors and to be able to reconcile God. All the best on your own deconstruction or faith journey. And until next time, let's keep growing together. Bye. Say bye, Chevy. Say bye. Say bye.